I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMar, and I'm here with my fantabulous co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together Rebecca and I are going to bring you an unforgettable hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families and your co-workers and your pets and the wild critters. We like the deer that we saw on our way in this morning, Rebecca and me. It was very nice.
It was.
Yes.
Peeking out from around the corners and bushes on Arlington Street.
Yeah, and so pretty much everybody and everything, because we are all wrapped up together on this one single little planet called Earth. And we got a typically excellent show lined up for you today. And actually, today's show, we're going to just chat for about 15 minutes here. And then we have a guest. And the guest is kind of interesting for today's show because if you're a regular listener, you know that we usually interview people involved in the ecological things going on. Everybody from frontline protesters to college professors to, community activists. And this week, we're kind of focusing, how I usually say it, your wealth, your health, and happiness. Well, we're focusing on the wealth part because, believe it or not, we have an interview with somebody from the IRS because President Biden and his big legislative push to try to curb global warming is mainly depending on tax credits. And so I wanted to talk to somebody from the IRS to tell us about those tax credits because there's actually quite a bit of tax credit available for doing cool, ecologically sustainable stuff. So that'll be our guest. He'll start about 10:15. Then we're going to hear from our advertisers and patrons, and we have a new advertiser. I'm so excited to be advertising this, and as you might expect, this is a company with an environmental bent to it, an ecological bent to it. You won't be hearing you'll never hear an ad for an oil company on For a Green Future. I can guarantee that. But so you'll have to wait till the bottom of the hour to hear who our new advertiser is. And then Rebecca, what do you have to talk about today?
I have asbestos.
A persistent environmental issue. And then we'll hear some ecological news for the rest of the hour. We've got a lot of really important stories, both good and bad. A lot of stuff happening on the environmental issue this past week. And hopefully at some point we'll hear from you at 866-909-1007. That's 866-909-1007. And on this week you can also text at 419-973-5841. We have our text receiving device all propped up and ready to go here. And that's 419-973-5841. Thank you. Yes. So, all right. So on to our show. Now, this little bit I wanted to talk to you about at the beginning of the show was kind of triggered by my phone gives me these summaries of news stories. Gives these lists of news stories they want me to read, and I was struck by there was a sort of a dichotomy there. There were two news stories, one on top of the other. The first one was all about the California storms and how terrible they were, and those are a demonstration of global warming, those storms. And then right under it was a story about the whole debacle they had at the House of Representatives. And it just struck me about how the House vote was so incredibly trivial compared to the storm vote. And the storm, global warming, that's what our government should be working on. But instead we're getting distracted. And one of the main tactics of the people who are distracting us is something called gaslighting. And gaslighting, we've talked about that before, that's when politicians especially, just make an outright, flat out, brazen, blatant lie and just try to pass it off as the truth. And a lot of that was going on in the U.S. House of Representatives this past week. Kind of paralyzed the whole thing, because when someone makes that blatant a lie, it kind of puts a stop to any actual debate or any useful discussion. And there was a story in the Toledo Blade this past week that ran on January 5th, and it was from a story by Tom Henry, and the title was "Bomb Cyclone Caused Tense Moments at Davis-Besse." And what that's what that was referring to was, when we had the Christmas storm, and the wind was blowing from the west over to the east, it dropped the lake levels in Lake Erie to amazing degrees. I mean, I saw some pictures on the internet where basically just entire bays were completely dry, and you could walk out on the lake to, lengths people had literally never been able to walk out to before. And of course that causes low water levels at Davis-Besse, which uses the lake water to cool itself. And
Okay, but hold on. What happens if you're walking out there and the wind suddenly reverses itself? Just out of curiosity.
Then you gotta hope. Then you better run.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Yeah, maybe not do that.
Right, and actually, it's funny you say that, because when Davis-Besse was under construction, exactly that happened. There had been a seiche. It's called a seiche because the wind had been coming from the south, blowing up onto the north, and then all of a sudden it stopped and it rushed back and it flooded the whole Davis-Besse construction zone while the plant was still under construction. So those seiches can happen in either direction. The wind can blow the water out of the lake on one side, and then if the wind stops suddenly, it'll flood back on the other direction. So anyway, the reason this ties in with gaslighting is because way back in the House Bill 6 hearings, back when we were trying to warn the state legislature that was a horrible, horrible idea, I spoke 4 times. And the first hearing that I spoke at, I mentioned that one of the problems with Davis-Besse is that it puts hot, cooling water back into the lake, and that makes things like our algal blooms in the summer, the toxic algae blooms, it makes it worse because toxic algae loves hot water. And then in the second hearing, one of the representatives that I talked to the first time, a fellow named Dick Stein, who we've talked about before on this show, who's a pro-nuclear zealot. Dick Stein totally gaslighted me. He said right there on the floor of the Ohio House of Representatives that Davis-Besse did not put any hot water back into Lake Erie. And
where did it go then?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we know hot water comes out of nuclear plants.
Right. And there is a cooling tower, but typically cooling towers only cool the water to half the temperature of the water that goes in. So the water's still plenty hot when it comes off the cooling tower. It's just not steaming hot anymore.
What kind of a less hotting tower?
And so I knew this, and I knew the water had to be going back into the lake. But I didn't have a reference right then that I could cite and say, "I'm sorry, Representative, you're lying." But anyway, this story by
Because you don't expect people to lie about like really obviously true things,
Right.
So you're not prepared to prove them,
Right.
Because you
don't breathe. It's like if someone said people don't breathe oxygen.
Right.
It's like I don't have a medical reference.
Yeah.
Can't quote you the
I never
page
thought I was
number.
going to have to look that up.
Right, but it's obvious to anybody who knows how cooling systems work on nuclear power plants that the hot water had to be going back into Lake Erie. And I also wasn't able to find any permits allowing it and so forth afterwards. But finally, this article by Tom Henry, there's a quote in there: the NRC refers to Lake Erie as the ultimate heat sink.
Oh boy.
Because cooling water comes from. Eventually, some of it gets released back into the lake after being, quote unquote, he used the word warmed inside the plant. And
isn't that nice warm?
yeah, I would use the word heated because this is a lot more than warm. It's quite hot. But,
wasn't there some sort of rumor? I don't know. I didn't it actually burn people?
Yeah, the water coming off a nuke plant can cause burns, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what ties all these comments together, is that Dick Stein was gaslighting, just open, brazen lying on the floor of the U.S. House, or the Ohio House of Representatives. And, finally, I've got the documentation to prove that he was lying. And, I've known he was lying since that hearing, but I haven't been able to publicly just call him a liar. But now I can.
Yay.
So thank you, Tom Henry, for that article. Now, the article itself, of course, was a typical, nothing to see here. There was never any danger to the general public from the low water levels. And even though the NRC had to grant a special dispensation to Davis-Besse to keep running because of the low water levels, and had there been a problem that needed extra cooling, we could have been, again, it's another close call for Davis-Besse and its many strings of close calls. But at least it had that little bit of information in it that now I can quote to refute Dick Stein. Okay, so now we're just about ready to go on to our guest, Eric Smith from the Internal Revenue Service, of all places. And he's going to be talking about something that you should pay attention to if you have a home, because this is the year to go out and buy those solar panels and install that geothermal heating system, because you're going to get a huge tax break if you do. So let's hear all about it. Josh, go ahead and play that interview. Well, hello and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share your name and title with our audience?
Well, Joe, my name is Eric Smith, and I'm actually a spokesman for the IRS.
Great. Thanks for coming on the show. I've invited you to discuss the energy conservation tax credits that take effect this year because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So, for a start, could you please explain what exactly a tax credit is and how they work?
Well, that's a very good question, Joe, and people are often confused by some of the terms that we use with taxes that Congress has developed. And probably the real confusion that you see most of all is between deductions and credits. A deduction reduces the income on which you figure the tax, whereas a credit reduces the actual tax itself. And it seems as if Congress has kind of moved more in the direction in recent years of using tax credits as a way of delivering tax benefits to folks rather than deductions. And certainly when it comes to the energy area, that is very definitely the case.
Okay, great. So now the specific tax credits we're talking about today are designed to encourage people to move towards cleaner energy. And I know that there's credits starting this year for things like solar panels on your house or installing geothermal heating. But what other sorts of environmentally friendly things are eligible for the new credits?
Well, let's actually talk about that a little bit, because that's actually to some extent the credit for alternative energy investments, such as you mentioned, solar, geothermal, and wind, and so forth, in one form or another, that's actually been around for quite a while. Now, the way that the credit is figured has varied, and that's where the new law did make some changes. Now, a lot of that, I'd say the bulk of that is actually in effect right now. In other words, if you put solar panels on your home or installed a geothermal system or something along those lines in 2022, you can actually claim that credit now when you file your 2022 return. And we have actually, for years, the form that you use to claim the home energy credits is Form 5695. That's an attachment to your tax return, one of the supplemental schedules that you use. The credit that's available for most of the alternative energy areas is 30% of the amount you spend. And so, and it's, and there is not now, at times there's been dollar limits on that, but the way the law is now, in 2022 and in the next number of years, there is not a dollar limit, but there are some practical limits. For example, if you if your tax liability is relatively small, then that tax credit is only going to reduce your tax to zero, and then the leftover amount you're going to carry forward to future years. So, to put it another way, it's you're not necessarily going to get the entire benefit right up front.
I see. So if it takes you down to less than zero, that actually you carry the balance into future tax years.
Yeah, you actually carry it. It's what they call a carryover. There are a number of different ways that it's treated in the tax law, and when it comes to this particular credit, it's actually a carryover. The form, if you follow it, and of course, and the thing is, so mostly people use software to prepare their returns now, and that's actually really helpful. If you use software, if you do it yourself, or you go to a tax preparer, that helps a lot in figuring the credit. It kind of lays it out on the form the way that it should be. And if there is a carryover, it'll tell you how much that is. But the key here is, particularly because it's a tax credit, in general it's 30% of the amount you spend, but exactly what the tax savings is going to vary somewhat. So, for example, if you spent $10,000 on an alternative energy system, then typically your savings is going to be $3,000. And if your tax liability is something above that $3,000 level, then you get that credit all in the year that you actually install that equipment. And if it's somewhat less than that, then the excess is carried over to the following year, and the form kind of builds that in and tells you what that figure is.
Okay. So, is this credit available for businesses as well as individuals?
Well, there are some credits available for business, but it's a little more involved there. A lot of those have much more to do with energy storage or generation, those kinds of things. What we think of as the standard residential energy credit, for example, if you're using part of your home for business and part of your home for personal use, let's say you have a home office or you're running a business out of your home, if it's a relatively small portion of your home that's used for business, then chances are you'll be able to get to take the full amount. And the standard in the law that's used is 20%. But if it's larger than that, then it's only going to apply to the personal side of the house. And if, for example, it's all applies to the business, your business side of your property, then there wouldn't be anything at all. So the computation or some of the intricacies can get a little involved there, but that's kind of basically how it works.
Okay. So how long are these tax credits supposed to last? Is this indefinitely into the future, or should people start like planning to get something in before these end?
Well, as a practical matter, I think most people, if they plan to do it in the next few years, they're going to get the credits. Right now, the law provides the full credits up through tax year 2032, and then there's kind of a phase out after that. But, far into the future, it's kind of hard to tell what's going to happen. It's not unusual for Congress to enact a provision, and it may have a kind of a sunset date, and then when that sunset date gets close, they decide to extend it. Now, you can't always depend upon that. It always depends on the environment at that time and, what policymakers want, what we as Americans tell our elected representatives we want. But we have all of that involved. But in the next few years, if the law remains unchanged, then people are generally going to get credits for investing in these kind of alternative energy sources. We actually, Joe, have put together a fact sheet, and you can find it on the IRS website, irs.gov. It's under our section on the new Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. You'll see a link for that law right on the front page of irs.gov. And then when you click through that, there's a list of various things that are coming into play under that law. And one of them is a fact sheet, and it's fact sheet 22-40, and it includes a series of questions and answers on the residential energy credits. And it covers what we've been discussing here, the alternative energy level, but it also covers the more traditional investments people make in home improvements that have an energy saving characteristic. Those have also been changed and expanded.
That would include things like insulation, I'm guessing?
Right. That includes things like insulation and heat pumps and things of that nature. Some of those, the dollar limits there's some dollar limits that come into play, and they're a little bit, you got to look at this is where the devil is definitely in the details. So you need to look at what you're thinking of doing and how this comes into play, because there are some limitations that come into effect. This fact sheet, among other things, does have some examples that can help illustrate it. The one key thing that's, I think, really worth pointing out here, Joe, though, is that some of the credits for insulation and those kinds of home improvements have been around for a while, but they've been very much limited in the sense that the limits have been based on your lifetime investment. And for a lot of people who have been doing these improvements from time to time over the past few years, they probably have used up those limits, because that was only $500, and that took into account anything that you did between 2006, when those came into effect, and 2021, or 2022 rather, last year. Now with the new law, those we don't look back to the lifetime investments. We only look to what you do in a particular year. So it's almost like you get a fresh start, and they have been kind of expanded. Kind of worth pointing out that there's a couple of key differences to know between the more standard home improvements and the alternative energy ones. The alternative energy ones, as I mentioned, they have some carryover provisions, and they're a little broader in terms of not having dollar limits. They also are available for both a home you still own, like that you're living in now, but also a newly constructed home. So in that sense, they have broader applicability. Now, the home improvements, the insulation, and those kinds of things, that's only on your existing home. If you're looking at building a new home or buying a new home or whatever, then that's not going to come into play. But if you're looking at the home you're in now and you want to make it more energy efficient, that's what that credit is designed to do. And it does not. It assumes that you have tax liability to offset. So there is not a carryover provision there. So it's a little tricky. The devil's in the details. That's why I really encourage folks look at our fact sheet and so forth to help do your planning. Another key point is a lot of these improvements. There are energy efficiency requirements. You have to meet certain energy efficiency standards. Usually, though, you can rely on the manufacturer's certification that they meet the requirements. So if you're not sure whether a particular thing you're looking at doing satisfies those requirements, the manufacturers are required by law to look at the technical requirements, specifications, make sure they meet them, and then inform you of that either through their promotional materials or materials on their website or their packaging or whatever. So,
okay. So you got to be a little careful
yeah.
about who you contract to do this.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, thanks very much. We're just about out of time here. Any quick general advice you give to people around tax time, since we're all fast approaching that?
Well, it's time to get started, get your records together, and start planning to do your return. We probably will start accepting returns filed electronically in the next few weeks. And certainly if you're looking at a refund, because of some changes in the law, probably a lot of people are going to be looking at smaller refunds this year. That's something that people should plan for, but be aware that could be a change. There are some changes in the law that could affect you, but the best way to do your return is with computer technology, whether you do it yourself or use a tax preparer. Electronic filing is the fastest way to get your return processed accurately, quickly, and completely. And if you get a refund, getting it quickly as well. So for a lot of good information about getting ready to do taxes, go to irs.gov. It's a very simple address, irs.gov.
Okay, there you go. That was our interview with Eric Smith from the Internal Revenue Service. And they're not usual guests on our show, to say the least. But the reason I did it is because this is a point where you can jump into this. I mean, one of the reasons I put this show on a sports channel is because it is kind of like a big competition. Are we going to save the planet, or is it going to collapse? And this is where you can sort of join the home team. And just a quick list again of those things that are eligible: solar panels, both heat and electric, fuel cells, wind turbines, heat pumps, and heat pump water heaters. So if you get geothermal heating to your house, it also provides hot water, so you can get a 30% discount on both. Insulation materials. There's other things like windows, and there's some limits on some of these things. Like for the windows, for example, you get 30% credit up to $600. Other things like the heat pumps, you just get 30% no matter how much it costs. So jump in there, and this is the year to start planning to actually do those sorts of things. All right, and speaking of jumping in, we are going to hear now from our advertisers and patrons. And first, one of our longtime advertisers that we're very grateful for, that's the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Another is to go to their website, wcparks.org, and they're on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, and so forth. That's the Wood County Park District. And now, little fanfare, please. For our brand new advertiser.
And For Green Future is brought to you by the Ecofill Shop. Ecofill Shop is located at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green, Ohio. And they sell all sorts of stuff. They sell cosmetics, bath and body supplies, home and garden supplies, cleaning supplies, towels, knickknacks, candles, and fragrances. And the thing is that they sell all these things without plastic. That's the whole idea of the Ecofill Shop, is that we're eliminating plastic. And their customers just love them. If you go to their website, ecofillshop.com, you'll see a bunch of testimonials. And on there, Nikki says, "I love the laundry detergent. Our family has sensitive skin, and this works great for all of us." And I just want to add to that I shave using shaving soap that I bought at the Ecofill Shop and a good old-fashioned brush like the old days. It works terrific. And if you're interested, you can call them at 419-944-8862, see what they've got, or check out their website, ecofillshop.com, or just stop on in at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green.
Okay, that is our new advertiser. So happy to have them aboard. Also, extremely happy to continue to have our patrons. And patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com, and there they searched for Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page, and on that Patreon page they chose which level of membership they wanted, and every month a little bit comes out of their account, comes over to us, and that's how we could afford to keep For a Green Future on the air. So thank you so much to our patrons. And now over to Rebecca. Rebecca, what will we be talking about this week?
All right, this week it's Asbestos 101, which everybody in my age group anyway knows about and remembers asbestos. I don't know, people might be starting to forget about it though, because it's been banned for a while, although it's still kind of around, which is bad. So yeah, the first thing when you go to look up asbestos that you see is that it causes cancer and pulmonary disease, because there are giant lawsuits about it. Long-term exposure creates risk of mesothelioma, lung, laryngeal, and ovarian cancers also. What it actually is, which, the fact that it causes cancer is up there before anything else, including what it is, but it's a naturally occurring fibrous silicate material composed of long fibrous crystals made of fibrils, which is where the problem is, because the fibrils can be released into the atmosphere by abrasion and other processes. They showed pictures. It was kind of like just growing loose on other crystals, and it looks vaguely like Santa Claus's beard. Apparently, it feels nice too. It's kind of long, silky fibers, so don't pet it though. I guess that it's not dangerous usually in like normal levels in the atmosphere, but of course we like to sort of refine and concentrate it because that's what we do. It's been mined in North America since the 1800s. Use really skyrocketed in World War II. It was used to strengthen cement and plastics, in insulation, roofing, fireproofing, and sound absorption. Because that is one of the nifty things that people discovered about asbestos. The melting point is something crazy high. Oh yeah, the melting point is 752 to 1,904 degrees Fahrenheit.
No,
I really hope not.
So.
When was this station built? Yeah, but
She's talking about our ceiling panels here in the studio.
Yeah, I'm looking up.
I don't think that's asbestos.
Yeah, they don't
Fingers
have that
crossed.
sort of weird, dingy look that they had from the beginning. They were not aesthetically good, so thank God for small Murphys. They weren't directly in the ceiling, exposed ceiling of your home very much.
Mm-hmm.
They could be in your house, but at least they were covered up by something. Yeah, so they're used for all this useful stuff. Bad news, whenever you demolish any construction, it goes out and contaminates the air, water, and soil. And it's released in renovation and vehicle maintenance. It's used for brakes, clutches, mining and manufacturing, and it stays in the lungs for really long periods of time once it's in there, those little fibril thingy hickeys. And puts it's risky for either acute, meaning brief but intense exposure, or long-term chronic low-level exposure. So just no good news there. And there's evidence of it being used in the Stone Age in ceramic pots. So we've really known about this for a very long time. I didn't get too much in the history of it, but apparently it was first banned in 1986, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
But it was still kind of you were not allowed to make any new construction materials with it, but you could use up your stockpile. So really, buildings up to 1990 often were made with asbestos. And I don't know, I guess maybe it's probably winding down now, but for a very long time, there was a boom industry in cleaning this stuff up. Because nobody wanted to do that. It was very, very, very dangerous. You had all kind of special equipment. So, people who could get it together and accumulate the skills and the equipment and stuff made out for a while. So
Right.
that's Just remember when you're dealing with Gen X and baby builders, we are chock full of asbestos, lead, and mercury. Basically, we're not doing very well.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for that, Rebecca. Yeah, asbestos it was the wonder material because it was touted as something that was fireproof.
Also, it does imply that there are these giant lawsuits, that there was some kind of a gap, perhaps, between discovering it was dangerous and banning it,
Oh yeah.
or
big,
people not,
big gap. I think it was like 20 years.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So it all gets kind. It was at the beginning. It was just ignorance, really. But then the ignorance was corrected and the behavior was not, and because money.
Yeah.
Because money, basically.
All right. Well, thanks, Rebecca.
Welcome.
And now on to ecological news. Our first story was Dr. Leah Stokes, who's a professor on climate at MIT, did some good news. We're going to start out with some good news. And that is that last year, heat pump sales outstripped natural gas furnace sales for the first time, 2022. There were about $4,100,000 gas furnaces installed in the U.S. in 2022, but there were about 4,250,000 heat pumps. And so the shift is happening finally. We finally are getting away from heating our buildings with fossil fuels. And, in the U.S., a lot of those, the bulk of those are air-to-air heat pumps, which are fine, they work. But ground source heat pumps are better because you get more thermal energy out of the ground than the air. It takes you less energy to get the same amount of heating out of a ground source heat pump. But both are good. I'm not saying don't do either. I'm just saying that the ground sources are better. And so that's some good news. That's a little bit of, on the horizon there. We're making the shift. The whole question is, are we doing it fast enough to survive? And that's still an open question. We don't know. Now, over to Japan, and unfortunately, we discover there that the Ministry of the Environment plans a demonstration test for the reuse of decontaminated soil in Shiryuku, Goyan, Japan.
He just made little quote marks with his fingers around decontaminated for those not watching the video.
Right, well,
not watching us.
And that whole sentence, because that was actually the title of an article on the website Fukushima 311 Watchdogs that was published on January 4th. And they're going to put the radioactive soil into the Imperial Gardens in Tokyo and use them for flower beds, and then test the surrounding areas for radiation, which is really evil in a lot of ways. But it also says that the Ministry of Environment in Japan doesn't understand food webs. Because what will happen is insects and worms and critters like that will get into those plants and into that soil, and then they'll be eaten by birds, or the seeds will be eaten by squirrels or mice or whatever, and they will absorb the radiation and spread it around. More than just dust blowing off of it would spread it around. So just putting radioactive dirt on a big pile and then measuring the surrounding area for radiation isn't going to tell you all the radiation that's been distributed. You got to go into the nests and into the little mouse homes and things if you really wanted to see, and go into the critters to find out where the radiation went. But yeah, really bad idea there in Japan. Now back to the U.S. and a story that's been going actually since the summer, which we haven't covered yet. But in Atlanta, there is a forest, a big forest, 356-acre forest, or 380-acre forest inside the city of Atlanta. And there's a plan to destroy about half of it in order to build two things. One is what they call Cop City, and that is the local SWAT team and paramilitary forces want to build a city to practice going around and shooting people and stuff inside of something that looks like an actual city neighborhood. So they want to cut down about half. That's about 85 of it for that, and then there's another 40 acres they want to cut down in order to build a Hollywood-style sound studio and celebrity airship or airstrip for flying in movie stars, so they could make movies and pretend to go around shooting people, which together those two projects would flatten about half of the 380 acres. And so there's a bunch of people protesting it. It's universally condemned in Atlanta by a whole spectrum of citizens groups and organizations. And so since the summer, there's been people living in the forest in tree houses and stuff. And what happened on December 15th is the SWAT teams went in and got some practice because they arrested 12 people and destroyed all the tree houses. And 6 of those 12 are being charged with terrorism. And the reason they're being charged with terrorism is because there was a pickup truck, a tow truck that was driven onto the property in preparation for cutting stuff down and towing stuff away, and people attacked it. People threw rocks at it and scared away the driver, and then once it was empty, they tore it apart and then burned what was left. And so based on that, they're charging 6 of these 12 people with terrorism. And it's important to notice that those people aren't specifically named as the people who attacked the truck, but there's sort of guilt by association there.
So what they were actually doing was trespassing. That was kind of it.
But, this, to me, this demonstrates a weakness. One of the reasons that I think it's so important to be nonviolent is because now the focus shifts over to the people who were arrested and charged with these outrageous charges, and everybody's going to focus on, are they going to prison? How long are they going to prison? And, the fundraising for their defense, and that draws the attention away from what's everybody in Atlanta universally opposes, which is the destruction of the forest in Atlanta. So
Although, to be fair, like this, the authorities are very good at squelching stories and or lying, whether you're violent or not.
that's true. That's true. But it's
But yeah, it's something you have to think about.
it
you know?
is, yeah. So but it that's why I personally reject those kinds of tactics. But it's still an ongoing battle, and that's and so that was an important development in it, and we'll keep an eye on what goes on over there in Atlanta. And we are also keeping our eye on what's happening in Europe, because next story, Europe is experiencing what has been called the greatest heat wave, the most extreme heat wave in European history. There's been a lot of articles about it. One good one is Salon.com on January 5th. And basically the Alps, all the glaciers are melting, all the ski resorts are closing because they're having temperatures up there on the tops of the mountains of like 45 and 46 degrees in the Alps in the middle of winter, in January. And there's not enough water, there's not enough snow cover providing water to make artificial snow. So they're actually opening up their summer trails and things. The Research Center for Alpine Ecosystems says that the Alps, the French Alps, have already warmed between 2 and 5 degrees, or about 2 degrees centigrade, and they're predicting by 2100 they'll have warmed by 5 degrees centigrade, with a third of the glaciers having disappeared by 2050. But as we know, that is still an underestimate because we are caught in what is it that we're caught in, Rebecca? A
cycle, positive feedback cycle.
Positive feedback loop, right?
Right.
And so all these
Which
estimates.
sounds like a lot of people are going to say really nice things about you, but that's not what it is.
No, it's not. No. All these estimates are too low still because what they do is they take the past curve and project from it. But in a positive feedback loop, you've got the curve itself is accelerating, and so you have to go faster than the current curve because the curve is getting faster all the time. And so it's bad. The temperatures in this heat wave are about 40 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. Belarus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Netherlands, Poland, all broke all-time January records for heat, and it's still going. So bad news there. Also, some bad news back here in Ohio. Next story, Governor DeWine, just this past Friday at 4:58 p.m., in order to make sure none of the mainstream media news outlets covered this, he signed over all the Ohio state parks to the oil and gas industry.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
House Bill 507 forces all the Ohio state agencies to give drilling permits to companies that want to drill for oil in Ohio state parks or any Ohio public land. We have some, believe it or not, we have some state agencies like the Ohio Oil and Gas Land Management Commission that are supposed to look at these applications and say, oh wait, that's going to destroy a state park. Maybe we'll deny that one, even though they're not very deniable. They don't deny very often, but once in a while they do. But now this law basically says that they shall give the oil and gas companies the right to drill. So basically,
Which people don't think of Ohio as an oil state, but in fact, there was in the 1800s. There was a pretty large oil boom, specifically in the town where Joe lives. And if you drive through Bowling Green, Ohio, which it's probably because you're on your way to someplace else, if you get off and circle around the town a little bit, there are these really beautiful, gorgeous painted lady houses that have all these sort of
right.
faces and vines and stuff carved in them and picked out with paint in some cases still, and those are from the oil boom.
and we have Marathon Oil.
I think it was 5 years old, or it lasted for or something, but it happened.
Yeah,
a
there's
lot of people
still
made some money.
Quite a lot of oil and gas wells around Ohio, and of course we have a ton of fracking in Ohio. And now we're going to have a ton of fracking in our state parks.
Oh, spiffy.
And there's a good article on it in Cleveland.com on 1/6/23. And here we go with my pet peeve, the long titles. The title is, With a stroke of his pen, Governor Mike DeWine defines natural gas as green energy. Yeah, that's another thing this bill does, is it literally, for the purposes of Ohio law, says that fossil fuels are green.
Again, glowing green, not the same as green energy.
Yeah, so really, really horrible bill. But, you know, this is what happens when politicians like DeWine can do terrible things like House Bill 6 and not face any repercussions on when they get elected, when they're back up for election. They do terrible things because they're like, oh, hey, nobody cares. So, but it's not too late to call them, and there's a lot of organizations that are saying, you know, we should still complain about this because maybe the next horrible thing he might hesitate a little bit. But right now, House Bill 507 has become law, and all our state parks and all the land around them are subject to oil and gas drilling. Now, this is one of those geopolitical stories, and we've talked before about how Japan wants to dump all the radioactive water that's still using to cool the Fukushima nuclear reactors. That water becomes intensely radioactive even with just one pass over the corium, the melted fuel that's still down there at the bottom of these holes that they've melted through the ground. And there's a story in ChinaMill.com, which ChinaMill is the name of it is ChinaMilitary.com, on January 5th, an article by Chen Zhuo. And the title is Japan Slammed for Reckless Decision on Release of Nuclear Contaminated Water. In other words, China has come out against Japan dumping this water. Now, China is a pro-nuclear state. They're planning to build a whole bunch more nuclear reactors. But the geopolitical reason for this one is that all the other countries on the Pacific Ocean, from Taiwan down to Indonesia, don't want China to do this. Korea, you know, all our allies. And we have come out in favor of Japan. We've come out in public, the US EPA has publicly said, yeah, go ahead, dump. That sounds great. And so what China is doing geopolitically is they're using this as a wedge to peel us away from all our allies in the Pacific Ocean, because a lot of our allies are very, very concerned about the idea of dumping millions and millions of gallons of radioactively contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean. So,
You mean they're using it as a wedge because we made this giant wedge and handed it to them, essentially.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just another example of having the nuclear industry destroy all our other foreign policy objectives.
Here, have a wedge.
Right.
It's big.
Here you go, China. Yeah, here's how to divide us from our allies.
Right.
And it's looking like Australia also doesn't want them to dump, and so it's looking like this might blow up into something. It might be, a big geopolitical sticking point. And if China confronts us on this, we're going to lose because none of our allies want it either. So that's a big story that the mainstream media didn't get. All right, last story, and sorry to end on a down note this week, but you got to take the news as it comes. At a place called East Carbon, Utah, so a little bit of foreshadowing there.
Oh boy.
The Lila Canyon coal mine has caught fire.
Oopsie.
And coal mine fires are horrible.
Destroyed an entire town forever.
Yes.
Noxious gases seeping out from Main Street.
Right, that's Centralia, Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Destroyed that town.
I thought something bad like that happened.
And that fire's still burning, and they can burn literally for hundreds of years. But the Lila Canyon coal mine is burning out of control in East Carbon, Utah. And there was an article on this. I got this article from NBC News, of all places, and a story that was run by Sarah Ruberg. And the thing about this story is that they all focused on how horrible it is that the people in this tiny little town are now going to lose their jobs. They don't know if they're going to be able to keep working because the coal mine is on fire.
And also their homes.
Right.
So that's not ideal.
Now, the thing is that a quarter of the people in East Carbon, Utah were already living in the poverty in poverty, even though there was this big coal mine which supposedly was providing all these wonderful jobs. And that's often the case, is that, yeah, people are dependent on these jobs, but they really don't pay that much, and the communities are generally very poor, even though they have a coal mine. And they hold tight to those jobs because they're the only jobs around, which the companies take advantage of. But globally, this is a disaster, because globally, even if we stop using carbon to generate electricity, these coal mine fires are going to keep going, and we may never be able to extinguish them. Sometimes they last months, sometimes years, sometimes hundreds of years. They have a plan. They're going to try to put it out. It's going to take like a year before they make the attempt. So we'll cross our fingers that it works. But in any event, that mine should be closing, because we should not be depending on coal at all. That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks to our new advertisers and our current patrons. This is Joe DeMar.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Bye-bye.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.